Urgent question. Mr. Stephen Timms.
Speaker, I'd like to ask the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions to make a statement on the cuts to entitlement to personal independence payment.
The Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Secretary Damien Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recent legal judgments have interpreted the assessment criteria for PIP, in ways that are different to what was originally intended by the coalition government. We are therefore now making amendments to clarify the criteria used to decide how much benefit claimants receive in order to restore the original aim of the policy as previously agreed by Parliament and which followed extensive consultation. I want to be clear what this is not. This is not a policy change, nor is it intended to make new savings. I'd like to reiterate my commitment that there will be no further welfare savings beyond those already legislated for. This will not result in any claimant seeing a reduction in the amount of PIP previously awarded by the DWP. Mental health conditions and physical disabilities which lead to higher costs will continue to be supported, as has always been the case. This government is committed to ensuring our welfare system provides a strong safety net for those who need it. That's why we spend around £50 billion a year supporting people with disabilities and health conditions, and we're investing more in mental health than ever before, spending a record £11.4 billion a year. Personal independence payments are part of that support and provide support towards the additional costs that disabled people face. At the core of PIP's design is the principle that support should be made according to need rather than a certain condition, whether physical or non-physical. It's also designed to focus more support on those who are likely to have higher costs associated with their disability. PIP works better than DLA for those with mental health conditions. For example, there are more people with mental health conditions receiving the higher rates of PIP than under the old DLA system. So this is about restoring the original intention of the benefit, which has been expanded by the legal judgments. It's entirely appropriate for the government to act to restore clarity to the law, as governments have done before and will no doubt continue to do in the future.
Mr. Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a written statement published without warning on Thursday, ministers announced the cuts the Secretary of State has just been referring to, and that it will take effect in 2 weeks' time. Over the weekend, another minister said this was to stop the payment of benefit to people, and I quote, taking pills at home who suffer from anxiety. Why, Mr. Speaker, is so little notice being given with no opportunity at all for parliamentary scrutiny of these substantial cuts? Will the Minister confirm, as stated in the impact assessment published with the regulation, that people suffering from schizophrenia, learning disability, autism and dementia will be among the worst affected by these cuts? And Mr. Speaker, the cut is being achieved by taking benefit away from people whose mobility impairments are the result of psychological distress. They will no longer be entitled to benefit, according to the wording of the regulation. Doesn't that directly contradict the Prime Minister's commitment to treat mental health on a par with physical health?
Secretary of State.
I thought every part of that question was based in error, if I may say. Nobody is losing money from what they were originally awarded by the DWP, so that part of the Right Honourable Gentleman's question is simply factually incorrect. Far from being slipped out, actually, we in the department made a huge effort to let people know this was happening. I personally left a message for the Shadow Secretary of State. I spoke to the Chairman of the Select Committee. I know my honourable friend, the Minister for Disabled People, spoke to a number of colleagues. So the idea that this was slipped out is simply ridiculous. And he talks about individual conditions. I can only repeat what I said in answer to his original question, that PIP is not awarded for conditions. It's awarded for the difficulty in living or mobility that results in those conditions, and that all these regulations do is restore the situation to where it was in late November before we had these two court judgments. This is not a new policy. This is not a spending cut. This is simply restoring the benefit to what was intended when it was first introduced under the coalition government.
Mr. Stephen Crabb.
Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that any welfare payment, especially one that provides a tiered level of cash payments to people living with an enormously diverse range of physical and mental conditions, does actually require clear assessment criteria, does require clarity in the law, and what these new regulations will do is restore that precision back to the law, which will benefit all users of the system?
I completely agree with my right honourable friend, who obviously has huge expertise in this area, that we do need clarity, that particularly the vulnerable people who are receiving PIP deserve clarity, and I can reassure them and the House that all these judgments do, all the regulations do, is restore us to the point which everyone knew they were at late last year and have been ever since PIP was introduced.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, as we've heard, on Thursday the government issued these new regulations by which disabled people or people with a chronic condition would be assessed for eligibility to personal independence payment. PIP helps disabled people to fund their living costs, and in particular the additional costs faced by the disabled people because of their condition. These regulations come into force in just over 2 weeks, were issued without any consultation with the Social Security Advisory Committee, the government saying this was because of the urgency of the issue. The government is in effect overturning 2 tribunal rulings which allows chronic psychological distress to be included in the PIP assessment. So if the Secretary of State was so unhappy with the tribunal rulings, why did he not use his powers under sections 25 and 26 of the Social Security Act 1998 and regulations 21 and 22 of the 99 Social Security and Child Support Regulations to challenge these rulings in the court? The effects of these actions not only undermine the judicial process but reduce eligibility to PIP supported to over 164,000 people with debilitating mental health conditions, including not being able to go outside their own homes. What discussion has the Secretary of State had with disabled people's organisations ahead of bringing forward these regulations? What is his assessment of the effects of these cuts on the health and well-being of the people affected? Given that disabled people are twice as likely to live in poverty as non-disabled people as a result of the extra costs they face, how many disabled people will be driven into debt or face poverty as a result of these cuts? What is the cumulative effect of these cuts, with the ESA RAG cuts affecting 500,000 disabled people due to come into effect in April? And finally, Mr. Speaker, why is the government contradicting their own earlier argument in the 2015 Upper Tribunal case of HL versus the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, where they argued psychological distress should be included in PIP assessments? Mr. Speaker, we are arguing for parity of esteem for mental health or physical health for some time now. Indeed, the Prime Minister famously says that they needed more support. Why won't the government honour this position?
Let me deal with some of the detailed points raised by the Honourable Lady. These regulations, we are incidentally appealing against the judgment as well, but because of the lack of clarity that would be caused by leaving the regulations in the limbo position they would be in after the upper tribunal decision, it is better to move quickly. Also, I should say that the tribunal itself said that the assessment criteria were not clear. If they believe that, then I am more than happy to accept that and indeed be grateful for them for telling us that they're not clear. So I am taking the opportunity to clarify the regulations now. She talked about the effect on disabled people, and absolutely I agree with her. That is the central core of what we are trying to do. And I would point out to her that over 2/3 of PIP recipients with a mental health condition get the enhanced rate daily living component, compared to just 22% who used to receive the highest rate DLA care. And that is why PIP is a better benefit than DLA, and that is what was happening under the previous regulations, which I am now restoring. Her questions were predicated on the basis that this was a cut. It is simply not a cut. It is not entirely honest of her to say that it is a cut. And if she looks at the facts of the case, then she will recognise she will recognise that people claiming PIP, specifically people claiming PIP with mental health conditions, are better off with PIP. They have been better off with PIP. What we are doing is making the benefit clear, making the change that means that the benefit is being paid as it has been since it was first introduced, and that is better for people, particularly with mental health conditions.
So I respect the cut and thrust of debate, but there can be no accusation of dishonesty in this chamber.
I will happily withdraw any thought.
That's quite sufficient. No further explanations required, and I'm very grateful to the Secretary of State and deeply obliged to him. Justin Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome that rightly the government is now spending record amounts of money supporting those with long-term health conditions and disabilities. And if the government was to decide to increase that yet further, surely it should be done so in conjunction with the charities and the stakeholders utilising their expertise rather than on an ad hoc basis as dictated by the courts.
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend, who also has huge expertise in this area, is exactly right. And of course there was very extensive consultation when PIP was first introduced about the design of what is inevitably a very complex benefit. And what we've seen, as I've just explained, is considerable improvement in the awards, particularly to those with mental health conditions. And what the government's changes do is restore that better situation that people ever knew in the past.
Corrie Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, these changes will, despite what's been said, exclude disabled people from vital financial assistance and sends a dangerous message to the public that people suffering from mental health conditions are less worthy of support than those with physical disabilities. We cannot and should not pit one disability against another. With condemnation across the spectrum, I urge the Secretary of State to rethink these callous changes. Can the Secretary of State offer any explanation why those with mental health conditions are not entitled to the same levels of support as others? And I ask that the Minister clarify if this matter will be brought to the House, and finally ask if that a debate could take place as a matter of urgency to give this House the opportunity to scrutinise the proposals fully and to put forward the concerns of disabled people across the UK.
I mean, the Honourable Lady will know that matters of what comes to debate are matters for the usual channels, and it ill behoves any Secretary of State to try and interfere in the actions of the usual channels. Her first question was based on the misapprehension that people with mental health conditions are doing worse under PIP as it is currently run. This is simply factually not the case. I am proud of the fact that the government overall is spending £11.4 billion on people with mental health conditions, more than any previous government has paid out. And specifically also that overall we are spending £50 billion a year on disability benefits. Every year in this Parliament we will be spending more than was spent in 2010. That is how we are meeting our commitments to disabled people, which I take very seriously and the whole government takes very seriously.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Are there lessons for the framers of the regulations to avoid them being effectively rewritten by the tribunals?
There are always lessons for anyone who writes regulations. Benefit regulations are of necessity complex, particularly because they need to be very sensitive, because we are dealing with vulnerable people. In this case, we are dealing with disabled people who have extra living costs or difficulties with mobility. Inevitably, the framers of regulations try to make them as exact as possible, and it is indeed one of the roles of the courts to point out where that has gone wrong. In this case, the courts have said they were not clear. What the government is doing is clarifying them. That is to everyone's benefits.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said that there should be parity of esteem between mental and physical health conditions. By overriding the courts on this matter, 160,000 people who otherwise would have been getting support through personal independence payments now will not get that support. Did the Prime Minister agree with this decision to overrule the courts and deprive these people of the support that they desperately need?
The Honourable Lady is wrong to say that 160,000 people people won't get personal independence payments because of that. And she knows well enough to look at the details of this to know that they are not, this is not whether you get PIP or not. This is a matter of there are two different cases, two of the descriptors which are now, she keeps treating me as though I'm the Prime Minister. I'm grateful, but I'm not. I'm the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions from a sedentary position. But she is simply wrong when she says that this will deny people PIP. PIP, as she knows, is given for the difficulty in living costs or in mobility costs. It is not a binary case. There are 12 different attributes that are considered. Each of those attributes has a large number of descriptors. These two court cases affect two of those descriptors. It is not as she paints it.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Secretary of State for his clarification. But can he assure my constituents who are affected by PIP that the government is committed to ensuring that assessments of PIP are of high quality and that people are properly supported throughout the process?
We are engaged in a PIP improvement project. My honourable friend is right to ask the question about consistency of assessments. That's one of the matters we're certainly addressing. The other one, which I know is a concern across the House, has been about delays, and I'm glad to report that because of the PIP improvement plan, claims are now being cleared at over 5 times the rate they were in January 2014. So the delays that have been in the system are being reduced, and we are indeed addressing the issue of consistency.
David Winnick.
I think forgotten that one of his predecessors resigned a year ago because of a cut to the disabled. And does he understand at all? It doesn't seem he really does. The feeling, the strong feeling among so many of the vulnerable that they will be in the firing line again for cuts. There's such anxiety. We receive emails constantly from those affected and organisations over the way the disabled are being hit out time and time again.
I'm happy to assure them and indeed the honourable gentleman that what I am talking about today is not a cut. We are not going to have any new welfare cuts this Parliament apart from those that have already been legislated for, and this decision that we've taken is not a cut.
Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clear that different medical conditions will have different impacts on people's living and mobility. Does my right honourable friend agree that we must recognise this simple fact if we are continue to target resources on those who are most vulnerable and most in need?
I do, and indeed that was the purpose of the original design of PIP, that it's better than disability living allowance, which it replaced, precisely because it reflects the reality in individuals' lives that some will have more difficulty in going about their daily business because of a disability, and the PIP benefit is specifically designed in a very careful and therefore complex way to achieve that, and it does. But one of the things that ministers have to do is to make sure that the rules are completely clear, and that's what we're doing today.
Eagle.
But if everything is working so well, why are my advice surgeries full of people who are waiting for their PIP assessments for a very long time, who are being denied them when they've been long-term disabled, who are being caused massive amounts of distress by the process, and who feel utter despair at having to have anything to do with it?
As I say, there is an improvement plan in place which lets the honourable lady know that things need to improve, and they are being improved, as I just explained in answer to the question from my honourable friend for Rochester and Strood. And I hope the honourable lady can be reassured by the fact we are recruiting a team of health professionals to help us scrutinise the suppliers' training and assessments. Both the two suppliers have got their own improvement plans in place as well. And, for example, we'll be trialling audio recording of selected assessments from the beginning of next month to understand better how the assessments can be improved.
Bills.
We'll be able to get that from both the providers.
Secretary of State.
Yes, I mean that again is one of the points that has been made by a number of the NGOs as well as colleagues on all sides of the House, and we are looking at that very seriously.
Amina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have some constituents who are unable to leave their homes without assistance due to physical disability, and others who are unable to leave their homes because of a mental disability. Why should one be entitled to receive support via PIP and not the other?
They both will be entitled to PIP at the level as it will be assessed. The only difference, clearly each individual is different and has different levels of difficulty. It is often the case that visual or cognitive impairments, people who are blind, are not going to have a fluctuating condition, which is clearly less amenable to treatment than some other conditions. So it's the level of the difficulty in someone's daily life, whether they've got a physical or mental health problem, that matters in terms of the PIP assessment.
James Morris.
The Secretary of State will be aware that since joining this place I've been a strong campaigner for parity of esteem between mental and physical health, and isn't one of the key points that he's making that actually it's not some kind of binary discussion between mental and physical health, that the point of PIP is that it actually promotes targeted help for people with mental health conditions, and isn't it also the case that more people are getting payments under PIP for mental health conditions than ever was the case with DLA?
Well, I pay tribute to my honourable friend for the very, very good work he's done in his time in this House on the mental health issue. And he's absolutely right. A core tenet of PIP's design is the principle of equivalence between physical and non-physical conditions. I think the whole House ought to welcome this move. It's why, as he's explained, it's a better benefit than DLA, and rolling PIP out in the way we are, attempting to improve the assessment process as we are, is the best way we can help people with all kinds of disabilities, but very specifically those with mental health conditions.
Jim Fitzpatrick.
Mr. Speaker, I received an email following the remarks of the number 10 advisor over the weekend. My constituent writes, as someone who's been diagnosed with PTSD and phobic anxiety, I'm deeply distressed and angry about his remarks. Considering the current lack of funding and social stigma that mentally disabled people already have to suffer, this is beyond the pale. Does the government recognise the offence that these remarks caused, and does it disassociate itself and apologise for them?
Well, he talks about a government advisor. It's my honourable friend, a member for Mid-Norfolk, I assume he's referring to, who has apologised for those remarks, who has, as it happens, also done a lot of work on mental health issues. And as he has explained, he has a personal history and a family history which makes him particularly sensitive to mental health issues. And since he has apologised, I would hope that the House would accept that apology.
Bless you. Hugh Merriman.
Mr. Speaker, for those of us who deal with vulnerable constituents, it's very frustrating to hear these matters described as cuts when they're very clearly not. Could I ask the Secretary of State to describe where from the £50 billion disability budget savings would have to be made to pay for this increase?
Well, since the purpose of the announcement and the regulations that the government is doing is not to have to look for cuts elsewhere, then I'm happy to say to my honourable friend that we can avoid that. But he is quite right. We have a welfare budget. We are spending more on disability benefits than any previous government has done, and we are proud of that fact.
The Green Democrats have tabled a prayer on this to try and force a debate, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for supporting it. A constituent, Catherine, contacted me very concerned about how the amendments will impact on her when she is transferred from DLA to PIP. She currently receives low-rate mobility and suffers from ADHD, depression, generalised anxiety and social phobia. Her life is severely affected by her mental health. She cannot plan the route of a journey, and she cannot follow the route of a familiar journey. Why does the government want to deny Catherine the mobility component of PIP?
Well, she is not having any of the any changes to the rules that have been that she's been applying under in the past. And I should gently point out to the honourable gentleman, these are rules that were passed by a government of which he was a member.
Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for coming and offering us some clarity on this issue. I think it's really helpful. Just on one specific point, I wondered if he could confirm that people who need help managing their medication continue to receive the support to do so.
Yes, Secretary of State.
Yes, and not only will they come under the appropriate descriptor for PIP, but of course one of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet is that of course they receive support from the NHS as well, that we have a healthcare system precisely to advise people on issues like medication. So the state is already doing something to help them, and clearly that's necessary, and that will continue to be a very important part of the system.
Mrs. Madeline Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mine say that the proposed changes will affect around 160,000 people, could prevent people accessing the financial support they need to get to health or job appointments, get out to pay for fuel and heating, take their children to school, see friends and family, things that are essential for their daily lives and recovery. If the Secretary of State is so confident that he's right and Mind is wrong, will he meet with Mind and actually discuss with them who is right and who is wrong, and then come back to the chamber and give the same assurance?
I'm always happy to meet Mind, and as it happens, my honourable friend, the Minister, has spoke to them already on this matter, and they are coming to the department to speak to us again soon. I would point out to them, as I have on this issue, yes, as I've pointed out to them, as I pointed out to the honourable lady before in the course of this urgent question. Nobody is losing any benefit that has originally been awarded to them by the DWP. So I think that is the fact that perhaps most needs to be got across to those who are receiving the benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I read the media reports on this change with alarm until I read into the detail of the regulation. And to that end, can the Secretary of State confirm my understanding that far more people with mental health issues will be eligible for PIP than ever were under the old DLA?
Yes, my honourable friend makes a correct point, which I indeed have made several times in the course of the last few minutes. PIP is a better benefit than DLA for a number of reasons, but perhaps the most important is that it is more available to those with mental health conditions. It always has been, and the rules we are putting in place make sure that it continues in the way that it always has done.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why is the government contradicting their earlier arguments in 2015 upper tribunal case of HL versus Secretary of State for DWP, where they argue that psychological distress should be included in PIP assessments?
Psychological distress is, I'm happy to assure the honourable lady, included in PIP assessments. It always has done, and nothing changes as a result of these regulations.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for the reassurances we've received so far, given the correspondence I've received after the media coverage. But can the Minister go further and just confirm that these regulations will not result in anybody receiving less money than they were awarded by the DWP, and there is no intention to make new savings?
I am happy to repeat yet again, nobody will receive less money as a PIP benefit than they were originally receiving in their award from the DWP as a result of the regulations we've introduced.
Green.
With learning disabilities, schizophrenia, autism, the conditions highlighted by my right honourable friend, are more likely to feel anxious about their assessment, experience greater difficulty in conveying information about their condition, and increasingly my constituents are telling me are subject to a more hostile and aggressive assessment process. Does the Secretary of State share my concerns that these people will be particularly vulnerable if these proposals are not introduced very carefully?
Well, we are introducing them very carefully, and I completely agree that people who are likely to suffer anxiety should not be made unnecessarily anxious. That is why I am at pains to reassure them, the House and everyone else that this is not a policy change, this is not a cut, nobody will receive less benefit than they were originally awarded by the DWP.
Mr. Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Secretary of State for his response. Can he, through the improvement plan, process of PIP, give assurances to my Crawley constituents who find it difficult to travel to assessments that they will be supported?
Yes, I can. We already assessors will visit people who need that particular service, and obviously we will continue to do so.
Mr. Richard Burton.
I think the reality of the situation, that the disability benefit system, whether PIP or its predecessor benefits, have never been sufficiently sensitive or flexible to the needs of people with mental health illnesses. And the court rulings in relation that we're discussing today was one small step of interpreting existing regulations, not new ones, to make that just a little bit better. And does he not recognise that by rushing out these new regulations, he's changing an interpretation of an existing one, and in doing so, he's going to make people with mental health problems and illnesses a lot more anxious and a lot more unfairly treated?
I think that's a central point. The Honourable Gentleman makes a centrally important point, but I don't agree with his assessment, particularly because what the Upper Tribunal said was that the regulations weren't clear enough. So what we're doing is clarifying them, and we're clarifying them in a way that restores the intention to the original intention that's always been there for the benefit. So that should provide certainty to people, not uncertainty.
Sir David Burrows.
I recognise the government is retaining the scope and funds for PIPs, but does not the focus on these vulnerable people with most challenging needs really highlight the need for more integration and more funds for social care?
I mean, my honourable friend, as ever, makes a good point on this, and he's right about greater integration. It's precisely why we have created a work and health unit. So, for the first time, my department and the Department of Health are working together on a daily basis for the very many people whose needs fall partly in health and partly because of the benefit system, so that we can actually provide a more integrated, personal and sensitive service to them.
Nick Thomas-Simmons.
Mr. Speaker, so many of my constituents have had to go through the mandatory reconsideration process and all the way to a tribunal to be awarded the number of PIP points they should have been awarded in the first place. Alongside these regulations, does the Secretary of State have any plans to introduce support for disabled people who are awaiting the outcome of tribunal decisions?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes the point about people who appeal. Only 6% of PIP judgments are appealed, so the number is very low. But we are seeking to improve the system by making sure that more health information is available earlier in the assessment process, which I'm sure will help his constituents.
Yeah. Mr. Philip Holloway.
I've been following the exchanges closely, and my constituents will want to know that their MP has understood things correctly. So can the Secretary of State confirm my understanding from what's been said, that 25% of PIP claimants now get the highest rate compared to 15% under DLA, and that more people with mental health conditions qualify for PIP than ever did before under the old DLA system?
Yes. My honourable friend is correct in both of those assumptions, and I'm happy that he can share them with his constituents. And perhaps more specifically, I can add one to him, that there are more PIP claimants with mental health conditions claiming the mobility component, 27% of PIP claimants, as compared to 9% on DLA, which is another improvement.
Tracy Brabin.
Speaker, I, like my honourable friend from Wallasey who's just left her place, have had surgeries faced with constituents who are increasingly anxious by these changes. So can the Secretary of State please confirm what assessment the government has undertaken on the impact of these cuts on the already vulnerable mental health status and well-being of claimants, and will he make that assessment available to the House?
Well, the equality analysis is obviously available, and I can only emphasise to the honourable gentleman, the honourable lady's constituents as well, and indeed the Shadow Secretary of State, who is chuntering from a sedentary position, that this is not a change in policy. This is not a cut. Nobody will receive less benefit than they were originally awarded by the DWP.
be ashamed of yourself.
Well, actually, there are people on both sides chuntering from sedentary position. Certainly not something I ever remember doing myself when I was on the back benches. Mr. Peter Bone.
Sir, you sat next to me on those benches, and I remember. We have an excellent Secretary of State, and probably one of the most caring in the government. And I'm sure what the government is doing is correct. But as the honourable gentleman opposite said, it does give members the opportunity today to highlight that the process of assessment is not working for a number of our constituents. I'm fed up with seeing a constituent every week who clearly should have been awarded it, not getting it. And could you say a little bit more about how we're going to improve that situation?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his kind remarks, and indeed for your remarks, Mr. Speaker, about the fact that you never chunted from the back benches, which will mean I'll be able to correct my own memory on those circumstances, having sat next to you on the back benches for many years as well. In terms of the PIP improvement process, we are obviously trying to improve all aspects of it, both the accuracy of the assessments, the speed of the assessments as well. And as I've said, I think the early provision of more health information, objective health information, will actually improve the situation hugely, not least for his constituents and others who find it a stressful process.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would challenge the assertion that PIP is better for people with mental health conditions. As a constituent of mine has a diagnosis of bipolar disorder and used to receive DLA on the grounds of a need for continual supervision. This qualifying criteria is not recognised under PIP, and my constituent has not only lost her entitlement to PIP, but consequently her working tax credit, which was passported via DLA. She is now considering leaving her job. What reassurance does this announcement give, Mr. Speaker, to my constituent and others in situations like hers?
Well, I can only repeat the facts to the honourable lady that over 2/3 of PIP recipients with a mental health condition get the enhanced rate daily living component. That compares to just 22% who receive the highest rate DLA care. And as I've just explained to my honourable friend, on the mobility component, the other part of PIP, the relevant figures are 27% and 9%. So the facts are incontrovertible. More people with mental health conditions are receiving PIP than used to receive DLA. It is a better benefit for people with mental health conditions than DLA was.
Mr. Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in South Dorset will be relieved to hear what my honourable friend said about looking at the assessment process, which goes horribly long far too often. Would he consider more consideration for home visits and taking into account not only the health officials, the GPs, but also information from relatives, families or friends?
Well, as I've just explained to my honourable friend from Crawley, we already do home visits. If there are cases where he thinks people should have had home visits and didn't, then do get in touch with me and we will look at the details of what's happening.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of the many constituents that have come to my surgery with problems of a PIP, there's one that particularly sticks in my mind. This was a man whose long-term mental health issues meant that he simply could not get out to work and yet had PIP refused. Now, this was not somebody who wanted to sit at home and take pills. He just simply was not able to get out there. How can the government possibly claim to want parity of esteem for mental health when it is trying to enshrine disparity as a result of this?
It is obviously it's impossible for you to comment on an individual case where I haven't seen the details, but the parity between mental and physical disabilities is embedded in PIP. That's the whole point of PIP, and I won't weary the House by repeating again the figures, but far more people with mental health conditions are receiving PIP than used to receive DLA, and it may be an uncomfortable truth on the opposition benches, but it's still true.
Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State firstly tell the House why the Social Security Advisory Committee was effectively bypassed in passing this regulation? Can he also tell us what consultations he's had with organisations who represent disabled people? And what does he say to those organisations who are concerned at his department's repeated attempts that people with mental health conditions who cannot follow the route of an unfamiliar journey alone are awarded the lower mobility rate and not the higher mobility rate?
I spoke to the chairman of the SSAC and explained to him why I was invoking the urgency procedure which is allowed, and he, of course, still, he and his committee still has the power to look at these regulations and make recommendations, and they can do so. But he will have observed that many people around on all benches have talked about the problems of uncertainty and how they particularly affect many of those with the mental health conditions that we've been talking about. What we are doing as quickly as possible is removing the uncertainty, meeting the upper tribunal's desire to have greater clarity in the system and restoring it to where it was before so that everyone understood it. It's the rules people have been claiming under for a long time. That provides quick certainty for people, and that's what many people want.